the president and general manager of Showtime Sports. He is Steven Espinoza. He joins us now. And Steven, the floor is all yours.
Brian, thanks very much. And thanks for joining us from Vegas, where you're attending to your other duties there, in a bubble of your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've had more than enough talk about bubbles, so we'll table that for now. Look, we're thrilled to announce what we believe is the strongest and most comprehensive schedule of fights in all of boxing. Meaningful fights, competitive matchups. This is what boxing fans have been waiting for ever since the sport shut down in March. Between March date, our last event on ShowBox, and August 1st, there'll be 141 days that we've been down. Like everyone else trying to figure our way into this world, have spent a tremendous amount of time coming up with protocols, but also a tremendous amount of time coming up with this schedule. You know, from highly regarded prospects to emerging stars to big time champions, we put them all in tough matchups. This lineup really delivers on our promise to provide boxing fans with the biggest fights, the most exciting fights, the highest quality presentation in the sport. You're doing 9 telecasts, and I think without question, the most significant fights in the sport since boxing has restarted. So, you know, we're thrilled. We can get into the details of the fight card, but I think what strikes me most of all is this is a really high quality schedule for 5 months of meaningful fights, competitive fights, and fights which are really going to determine champions and challengers for the foreseeable future.
I know there's a lot of people in the media who certainly want to ask you some questions, Steven. Let me start it off though. I'm just curious. It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to announce our return. You decided to say we're going to announce our return and then lay out the rest of the year. What went behind that thinking to say, okay, I'm just going to lay out the entire schedule?
Well, I think we had the opportunity to, with all this time, everybody starting from the same position. You know, we knew everybody needed fights. There was no jockeying around schedules. So we just put our nose to the grindstone and did it. I think, you know, wherever we can bring a sense of order and predictability to the sport, for the fans, for the fighters themselves, and for us in the sport to understand how all these fights fit together. You know, it takes some extra effort, but it's one of the ways that we think we can advance the sport by getting as much ahead of things as we can. In this case, you know, 5 months.
You know, the sport has already returned, and we've seen some matches on television. And listen, this is no shade at all, but when I look at the schedule, you call them high quality, I call them bangers. That's what fight fans want. Talk to me about not only the return, but it seemed like you put an emphasis on, yo, I want to make sure that we give fight fans what they've been craving for.
Yeah, we said it a few months ago at the start of the shutdown that we weren't just going to come back for the sake of coming back, you know, just coming back to do fights and put fights on the air. We wanted to come back at the high level with meaningful fights, with fights which would remind the public why they're excited about the sport of boxing, why they're boxing fans. So you put to a schedule of week after week of high quality competitive fights with big names, with meaningful fights. You know, before we know it, I know the sport is going to be back where it should be in terms of momentum and positive energy.
You know, I mentioned that we're coming back at the Mohegan Sun in Connecticut. Will all the fights take place there, or do you ever see us moving into another venue at some point?
Yeah, you know, our initial few fights are going to be at Mohegan Sun. They've been a great host so far, and we expect to work really well with them. Having said that, you know, these guys and the fans want a chance to interact, so we're going to monitor the situation and try and figure out if there's an opportunity to go outside of Connecticut, especially in front of a crowd. We would jump at it as long as we can do it safely. So I think for the initial plan is to stick at Mohegan, but we're going to keep an eye out, monitor the situation, and hope that we can get back to normal relatively soon.
Now, I know there are a number of media members who want to ask you questions. Before I wrap up here, I got to ask you about the September fight with the Charlos. I mean, that is a unique situation there. So you have a day night, all for one price, 6 fights, 3 in the afternoon, 3 in the evening, featuring the Charlo twins, world title fight, unification. How'd you come up with that? It's really unique.
Well, it's one of those situations. Jamal and Jamel have always said that they wanted to do big events, historic events, events that are unlike any other, unprecedented events, and that's what this is. You'd have to go back to those marathon Don King pay-per-views of the '80s, where you would have this many title fights on one card, and even on those fights, 30, 40 years ago, you didn't see the array of talent that we're getting on September 26th. 4 world title fights, a unification fight, Jamal taking, arguably the toughest fights of their careers on the biggest stage. It's sort of the crown jewel in the schedule right now.
Of course, the Charlo twins will join us, and we're going to ask them some questions and let the media ask them some questions as well. I know a number of members of the media have questions for you, Stephen. So with that, let me bring in Chris de Blasio. He's our Senior Vice President of Communications. And Chris, why don't you acknowledge the media members and allow them to ask questions to Stephen?
Thank you, Brian. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We're going to go right away to our first questions for Stephen. Manuk Ekopian from Boxing Scene and also representing Los Angeles Times. Manuk, you can unmute yourself and you should be able to ask your question now.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Stephen. Hello, Brian. Thank you very much for taking the time. Awesome slate of shows, and congratulations for bringing it all together. Stephen, you're staging pay-per-view events in a pandemic. Are you somewhat uneasy that you've perhaps tapped fighters who've never headlined pay-per-views before, as you kind of look to make sure these events are financially responsible for you guys too?
Well, the reality is, it would be something not to take into account the economic situation across the country. There are certain realities of that. There are a lot of people who have been squeezed financially, and that was one of the big motivating factors for why we structured it the way we did. Was to try and provide, not just a value proposition here, but more value than we've seen on any recent pay-per-view. So, the reality pay-per-view is a tool to help fights happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. We understand that there are economic pressures, there are financial pressures here, but we think this is a great value proposition, and we think the market will respond. When you get this amount of quality on one card, it is a special, one-of-a-kind event, and we think the audience will show up for it.
A lot of conversations have taken place that perhaps the boxing pay-per-view pricing model needs to adjust amidst the pandemic. Have you thought about pricing yet? How much will these pay-per-views cost?
We have thought about pricing. Our pricing will be in line with what previous have been. I think over the last couple of years, we'll make that announcement fairly shortly. But again, these are fights, and you look at the quality and caliber of the matchups that we really have to go to pay-per-view in order to finance. So again, I think that if we rely on it sparingly and for the true top-tier events, I think we can do some business and do a great event.
And lastly, the dual pay-per-view is an exciting idea and something that hasn't been done before, and I'm pretty sure fans are excited about it as well. From a broadcast perspective, what is the biggest challenge about staging a show of that magnitude and that quantity and volume?
Well, I'd say it's probably the bladders of everybody working on the production. So, Brian's muted, but I know he appreciates this. Anybody who's got to be sitting, in a chair or behind a camera for potentially, 6 hours straight, if not more, is a challenge. We had explored the possibility of doing this over 2 nights, as WWE has done in the past. That turned out that it was too difficult and ultimately wasn't feasible to implement technologically with the distributors. So we said, look, we'll turn it into a doubleheader. We see doubleheaders in the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball. and this is a great value proposition for one price.
Mhm. And one other thing with the Gervonta Davis, Leo Santa Cruz pay-per-view, I know a lot of those conversations early on before the pandemic was to bring the card to Los Angeles, namely Staples Center. I know that fight is 3 months away. How serious are you guys about moving the pieces to the puzzle around and perhaps reconsidering venue changes throughout all this?
We are definitely going to keep our eye on the market, on the public health situation. Look, everybody who's on the schedule would prefer to be in front of fans and interacting with fans, and being able to sell tickets and fight at home and things like that. But everyone on this card has also realized that we have to adjust. We can't put everything on pause because of the situation we're dealing with. We have figured out a way that we believe we can pull these events off with a minimum of risk. And if it proves that we can do that in other states in front of limited crowds or ultimately in full crowds, we'll make that move when we can. But I think as a group, the fighters that you're seeing on this schedule have said, I'd love to be in front of a crowd, but I'm not going to wait indefinitely. The sport has to go on, their careers have to go on, and they're all anxious to fight.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate the time.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Manuk. We're going to keep this moving. We have some of our champions and challengers waiting in the wings here to get on, make their opening comments and ask questions. We'll just take 2 more for Stephen. I'm going to go to DeMichael Cole out of Philadelphia. DeMichael, go ahead. You'll have to unmute yourself. Yes.
All right. Yep. Stephen, can you hear me?
Yep, got you.
All right. As far as the Jaron Ennis opponent, what has to be figured out there, and when can we expect a decision on who he will fight and whatnot?
We're close. We're in discussions with a handful of guys. There's for guys like Jaron and a lot of the top tier fighters that are on the schedule have gone through the same thing. There comes a point where it gets tougher and tougher to get them fights. And Jaron's right in that in the standpoint. Like, he's a tough opponent. He's not at the pay-per-view level yet. So everyone looks at it and said, like, that's a lot of risk, and the price they ask for goes up accordingly. But we'll find him a quality opponent. It'll just take probably a few more days, hopefully.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, DeMichael. I'm going to take one more for you, Stephen, from Dan Rayfield. Dan, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me, Steve?
Danimol, how are you?
Hey, Steve. I love the pandemic haircut. Hope you're doing.
Yeah.
Hope you're doing all right.
We're figuring okay. You still there, Dan?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, got you. We got you back.
Okay. No, I was saying, and as it relates to the September 26th card, which is an interesting concept how you're going to do that, but just from a nuts and bolts perspective, what time would you go on the air with that first part of the doubleheader? What is the first part of the doubleheader? And then what happens in between, and when do you start that second part?
That's those are
The schedule
details that
will work.
we haven't completely worked out yet. At a certain point, it may be between Jamel and Jamal to work out. But the reality is, they're 2 standalone events, with their own undercards. And I don't think it really matters who goes first. Sometimes you have a Lakers Celtics doubleheader. Sometimes the Lakers are in the first game, sometimes they're in the second game. But it's a great block of boxing, a little marathon. It's one of those where you can camp out and get some of the best fights of the year all on one card.
So yeah, no, my question really was not so much about specifically who goes first, but so you put on those first 3 fights.
Yeah. We
Brian get to go
decided,
take a lunch break and come back, and like a half hour later you start the next part of the show.
That's what we would like to do. Give the guys, and again, Brian is very appreciative of any chance to go to the bathroom, grab a sandwich, have a cup of coffee. So we'll take a break between the 2 shows, but it will be formatted as 2 shows.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
2 shows with 2 undercards.
The other thing, it didn't say it on the graphic that that Brian spoke about when he put it up, but in the press announcement, in terms of the Leo Santa Cruz and Gervonta Davis fight, it referred to the fight as being for both the title.
Correct.
Gervonta holds at 135 pounds, as well as the Leo title at 130 pounds. Reminds me of like the Sugar Ray Leonard Lalonde.
Exactly.
So is that sort of what they're going to do? Make the weight limit?
Absolutely. I mean, they'll both be weighing in at 130, but both the 30 and 35 titles will be at stake. And it is, we've done some research. I mean, the most obvious example is Ray Leonard. And it's something that's done very infrequently, and it's just a bonus for that event.
And you know, to look at also this, and I'm not trying to be negative because it's a terrific schedule. Also, maybe a hedge of Davis's weight issues, that if he doesn't make 130, there's still a stake.
I think, look, he's motivated here. I don't think there'll be any problems making weight on this one.
Okay, and just one other question for you. It's like I said, it's an excellent schedule. I wonder, there's one fight that sort of stuck out to me that is not on the schedule. I wonder if there are plans to add yet another event before the end of the year. You do have the fight that sort of lingers there, the Claressa Shields fight that I know that you were trying to reschedule.
Right.
Just
Right.
What's the status of that? And is
Yeah,
that going to be part of the
this,
schedule?
you know, we were delaying this announcement a little bit to try and get as much in as we possibly could. Inevitably, there are some things that didn't quite get finished. So obviously, there's a couple cards which need to be filled out. You know, we're looking, once we get the first couple championship boxing dates under our belt, we will start adding in show boxes. We'll have a date for Claressa. There will be other additional things on the schedule, you know, as we go along, but this is sort of the meat of it.
All right, so you did say that besides that, there'll also be some show boxes, strength.
Yes, right.
Okay, great.
Once we get the protocols and we're comfortable doing that, then we'll add in the show boxes initially from Mohegan, and then, you know, to be determined as we go along.
Okay, Stephen, thank you. We're going to be available, obviously. Stephen is, and the door is open. You guys can reach out to us if you have more questions for Stephen later today or in the future.